Let's watch some crazy stuff, yo!
From the Justin Roiland backlash finally dying down, to getting the go-ahead from Fox on a new show, it's fair to say that Rick and Morty co-creator Dan Harmon had a pretty rocky start to 2023. What with Roiland, the man behind the titular character of the widely popular show, being fired and all, but Harmon's gonna catch a break pretty soon. After all, Fox just announced that Crapopolis has been renewed for Season 3. Now, I know what you're thinking. What's Crapopolis? Well, it's another Harmon brainchild after the wildly popular Rick and Morty. This show, however, is more of a solo venture. Roiland's never been a part of it. In hindsight, for good measure. While the voice behind both Rick Sanchez and Morty continues to claim innocence, the charges levied against him, domestic violence and felony imprisonment, were just about enough for the network to give him the boot. Naturally, just about every other character on the show will now have to be recast, something that's probably kept Harmon up for a few nights. But the man who brought us Harmontown can probably rest easy knowing that Crapopolis won't have to go through a major reboot. Oh, and to circle back to what is Crapopolis? Well, it's an upcoming animated sitcom distributed by Fox Media. If the question is, how do you gauge just how much faith network producers have in your work? The answer would be, they greenlight a third season before its release. And then, of course, you have a man like Harmon steering the ship. Fox's president of scripted programming, Michael Thorne, talked about the upcoming sitcom that's been sitting in Fox's library for about 3 years now. He talked about Crapopolis at the 2023 London screening event. The more we see from production, the more excited we are about their creativity, story arcs, flawless execution, brilliant voice cast, and ability to pump out episode after episode of astonishing events and outrageous and unexpected hilarity. I mean, it'd be fair to say that they love it. So much so, in fact, that the series was given a straight-to-release order by the network and greenlit for a second and a third season, all before we even had a chance to sit down and watch episode 1. I know a chunk of you guys just left to stream Crapopolis right now to catch up on what the hype was about, but they won't find the show anywhere. For now. Why? Well, because Fox has held back the release for now. We know that the show had network executives rolling in fits of laughter. I mean, Thorne told the world that it was one of the funniest animated series he'd ever seen. And sure, I'd love to take his word for it, but I'd rather watch it for myself. Unfortunately, the series hasn't been distributed just yet. Why? Well, Harmon went to Fox to talk about Crapopolis back in 2020. The series was a straight-to-series release, and work on Season 1 started immediately. In 2022, the series was renewed for a second season, and just recently, a third season was announced. Crapopolis was initially scheduled to be released sometime in 2022. Why was the series halted? Some believe it had something to do with Roiland. I'll spare you the gory details of what Roiland's been accused of doing, but they're not something you can bounce back from. Even if your identity is linked to a crazy and cruel mad scientist such as Rick Sanchez himself. The man's been accused of domestic violence by an ex-girlfriend, and has since had several women come out claiming he'd either assaulted them or made unwanted sexual remarks to them. To think, Roiland's not even in Crapopolis, but he's managed to make the executives at Fox think twice about releasing it. They're probably a little more cautious than necessary because this is the first animated series that's fully owned by Fox Entertainment. Also, since the premise of the show deserves an actual shot, it's about a family of dysfunctional gods in ancient Greece. Crapopolis tells us the story of a family of gods who are desperately trying to navigate through running the country, dealing with humans, mythical beings, and whatever else Harmon's concocted up. The series features his signature animation design, the kind you've probably already seen on Rick and Morty, or Hulu's Solar Opposites. It's a pretty interesting premise. We've seen promotional posters from the show too, and yep, it all checks out. The series should be given 3 seasons right from the go-ahead. I talked about Fox taking their sweet time with Crapopolis because of the whole Roiland situation and the threat of it overshadowing it. They might also be a bit more cautious this time around, considering how they passed on Solar Opposites before Hulu decided to pick it up. As you can tell, Fox made a mistake on that front. Thorne mentioned a stellar cast for the upcoming series, and I think stellar doesn't do this voice actor ensemble any justice. Recasting a popular character is probably akin to walking through hell and back in the animated series world. especially if the popular character is the single most popular character in the world right now. And it's not just one character. Roiland's charges really had Harmon and Fox scrambling. But Dan won't have to have the same problem with Krapopolis since Roiland was never a part of the show to begin with. Could you imagine having to recast leading actors over 3 seasons in an animated series that hasn't even been released yet? Thorne sounded pretty enthusiastic about the voice cast ensemble for Krapopolis, and you would too. We have Richard Ayoade as Tyrannus, the human king of Krapopolis, Emmy Award-winning Hannah Waddingham as the self-destructive goddess Deliria, Matt Berry as the cheeky and lazy Schlub, Pam Murphy as a Cyclops, and Duncan Trussell as Hippocampus. They're joined by Stephanie Beatriz, Tara Strong, Dove Cameron, and a handful of other notable names. Jordan Young, the man behind the equally popular animated series BoJack Horseman, was onboarded as the series showrunner in June 2021. Everyone's coming together to make sure Krapopolis is a success, and I think it will be. So that's on Harmon receiving some good news for one animated series, but what about Rick and Morty? I mean, I get it, Roiland isn't anyone's favorite anymore, he lost that. But does this mean we're about to enter into a new and more bizarre world of Rick and Morty now that he's been given the boot? Well, considering how the latest season ended for the show with the cliffhangers of all cliffhangers, it was basically Rick telling Morty that he's going to do something unlike what we've seen from him before. Some pretty strong claims from a series that had a mountain of expectations from it from the get-go. Sure, they didn't anticipate Roiland's charges, but what can you do about it? Harmon hasn't really talked much about Rick and Morty and the future of the show since Roiland's charges came to light. But fans have been reassured that nothing, besides what is reasonably expected in their world, would change on Rick and Morty. Don't take it from me, take it from the guys we trust more than anyone else. An unnamed source working on Rick and Morty confirmed that Roiland wouldn't be missed. That's a bit harsh, but the source claims that besides voicing a few, well, most characters on the show, Roiland didn't really do much. He hadn't done much on the show since its 3rd season. And this wasn't by design. It was just the fact that Harmon is known for having more creativity than practically anyone in the world of sitcoms and specials. So Roiland reeled it in pretty much immediately after the series was first released in 2013. Afterward, he started focusing on video games, NFTs, and blockchains, while Dan would spend hours on end working out the next big thing for Rick Sanchez and Morty Smith. Questions like, what could top Pickle Rick haunted Harmon, and not Roiland? Because again, according to the unnamed source, things just functioned like that. Roiland did have some creative leeway, but it was Dan who called the shots. And Fox trusted him enough to take his word for gospel. Probably why they've announced 3 seasons of a show that hasn't even been released yet, right? And on that note, this was it for the fantastic news Harmon just got.